Welcome to the Planet Pulse Pacific podcast. My name is Ben Adelberg and I'm coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. Tēnei ka mihi ke te mana, whenua o Aotearoa.
And g'day, I'm Emma Stratton. I'm talking to you from Darrinbal country in Queensland. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections with land, water and community. Finally, if you find value in this potty, please help us get the word out there, share it with a friend, or consider buying us a coffee if you'd like to support our work. Dr. Kate Wylie is a GP and the Executive Director of Doctors for the Environment Australia. A long-time friend of the show and one of our most thoughtful and eloquent guests, Kate joins us to unpack the United Nations' recent Global Water Bankruptcy report and what those findings mean for people in our corner of the world. So there's lots to chat about today. Let's dive right in. Kate, g'day. Thank you so much for joining us again.
How you going, Emma? How you going, Ben? Lovely to see you both again, or talk with you both again. I'll just start off acknowledging that I'm on Ghana land. So hello to a group of people in Ghana is Namani. So hello, everybody. And, great to be back here talking about what is actually a very hard topic, but a pretty important one, which is this concept of global water bankruptcy.
Now, Kate, before we get underway, for our long-time listeners, they should know that this is the fourth time they are hearing you on our podcast, dating back to season 1, so 6 years ago. Gosh, Emma, we're getting old in podcasting terms even. But for our new listeners, who is Dr. Kate Wylie? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Ben. So I'm a GP by trade. So I've been working in small group general practice in suburban Adelaide for 20-something years. I was born and raised in Broken Hill, which is a, town in outback Australia. It's a mining community. It knows a lot about drought and it knows a lot about water shortage, which is kind of relevant to what we're talking about today. But it was 2018, I think, that I realised that climate change and human health was probably the most important thing that I could be thinking about. And, being a doctor, it was like, how can I make a positive change in the world around me, considering how important climate change and all the other impacts of our planetary on our planet's health that I'm learning more and more over time. How can I do the best thing I can for the health of my community and the health of my planet? And I started becoming more and more climate active and, got involved with RACGP's climate group and chaired that for a while and used to have my own little side hustle called Climate Medicine, which I think was when we had our first podcast chat was about that. That's kind of sort of morphed away a little bit now, but I'm now the Executive Director of Doctors for the Environment Australia. So we're a not-for-profit group of doctors and medical students who volunteer our time to advocate for the health of people and planet, basically, and we care about emissions reductions, so reducing our dependence on coal, oil and gas, the need to protect our natural world because our natural world is in such big trouble, and also how we practice healthcare sustainably because we think it's important to look after our own industry. If we're going to, go out there in the world and ask other people to do the right thing, we need to do the right thing ourselves. And so I've been doing this now for about 3 years, having this role as Executive Director. And I really enjoy it. It's pretty fun. It's, relentless, but it's, it's good.
All right, so let's dive into it. The UN released their Global Water Bankruptcy report earlier this year. You've written an excellent article in MJA's Insight Plus that just gives a really lovely overview of the findings. Lovely is probably the wrong word to use there. But, what it means for us here in Australia. And of course, much of this is going to be applicable to New Zealand as well. So to start with, can you briefly explain what is meant by water bankruptcy in terms of supply and demand?
Yeah, no problems, Emma. I mean, the fundamental is that we are running out of water. On a global perspective, we are using more water than we have as supply. So if you think of like a bathtub analogy, the plug is open, all the water's falling out, draining out, and there's not enough left for us to use. So, we know we have less water supply due to things associated like with climate change, with planet getting hotter, so droughts. Our rivers and our lakes are drying up, our wetlands are drying up, our aquifers are in trouble, and we are using so much that we're getting past the point where it can really recover. And so, for a long time, we've been talked about things like water crisis, or, when we had the millennial drought, we were all worried about water all the time. But what this report is trying to, the point this report is trying to make is that it's gone past that now. We're in bankruptcy, and that, we're kind of insolvent when it comes to water. We can't pay our debts, and that if we don't take this seriously now, we're really heading for disaster. And they make the point, obviously, that a lot of people are water insecure now. It's only getting worse. And I think they're using the term quite deliberately and provocatively to try and wake people up. And I wouldn't mind talking a bit about extraction. Like, we use so much water, right? We're kind of cavalier, might be a good word to use. We don't seem to, I don't know, do we just think we've got an endless supply? Do we think we'll always be able to turn the tap on and water will come out? But we've got, like, agriculture is the biggest culprit when it comes to water use. 75% of our water use globally comes from agriculture. And, sure, I don't have to tell you guys which is the most water dependent kind of food source. It's beef, it's our cattle farming, and then sheep and all the animal-based proteins and nuts and things. And then there's the water we use for energy. And so, again, fossil fuels are, highly water dependent, water intensive energy source. And then industry, 22% of global water consumption is from industry. So, fundamentally, the way that we're living on our planet is not sustainable from a water perspective. And if we, don't wake up, we're going to get to a point one day where we turn the tap on and nothing will come out.
When looking at our planetary boundaries framework, 6 of our 9 have been exceeded, and one of those 6 is freshwater use. And we generally talk about the biggest driver of, as you've just said, of those tipping points being due to animal agriculture. What does that actually mean in terms of where people live, in terms of the global population?
So, the planetary health boundaries, and we've actually just crossed into the danger zone for ocean acidification now too, Ben. So it's 7 of 9. We're out of the safe operating zone. So we're really kind of mucking it up, aren't we? And, the global south tends to be on the receiving end of all of these boundaries, and yet it's the global north that has the major consumption points. Certainly when you look at the water, it's the equatorial belt, it's all of Africa. Those are the countries that have the highest risk of, or are experiencing the most water bankruptcy now. When you look at climate change, it's the same thing. It's the global south and the equatorial belt. When you look at air pollution, which is, another one of the planetary health boundaries, similar scenario. Same thing with biodiversity loss. It seems like the places that consume the most, I don't know, maybe these countries are still wealthy enough to buy it themselves out of trouble. And the people on the receiving end are the people least responsible for the problem, which is, the whole concept of social justice. I don't think that will apply forever, though. And I think this is a point, that I think, here we are in Australia and New Zealand, we're well-developed countries, we're relatively well off. And so I think historically we might have been a little bit, we'll be all right because, we're doing okay here. But that's not going to last forever, that kind of attitude. We're going downhill, and, climate change is certainly affecting our health now. Water insecurity, when you look at what it means in Australia, particularly, especially in outback South Australia, or for me in South Australia, driest state on the driest continent, we're not going to be able to get away with it forever. We need to stop being so destructive in our practices.
Mm. What are some of the main health consequences of water scarcity and, poor water quality?
The first and most obvious one is food. food insecurity. So, we need water to water crops, we need water to water livestock. And so, if you don't have enough water, you can't grow your own food. And so, that means malnutrition, it means starvation at an extreme level. It also means like water stagnation. So, you tend to have, little pools and pockets of water, and that means a big breeding ground for mosquitoes, particularly. And so, we're all aware of, malaria and dengue increasing globally, both in terms of spread of infection, like where you're more likely to get it, the disease locality is spreading, and the season of infectivity is spreading. Malaria is a massive condition. Dengue is a massive condition. And in Australia, we're seeing, Barmah forest virus, Ross River virus, again, diseases spread by insects. Mental health impacts, of course, as we watch all these things go down, it can't help but be damaging to our mental health. There's probably more.
Well, I know like the less visible health impacts, like the mental health stuff, would be huge in Australia. I remember growing up in rural Queensland in the 90s. So we had extreme drought for like half the decade. And that caused just immense social and emotional strain on so many families in that community. And then the flow-on effects in terms of job loss and domestic violence, and like it's huge.
Yeah, isn't it? And we saw that, didn't we? With I grew up in Broken Hill, very similar kind of thing, Emma. Where it's hot and it's dry, and we that town isn't anymore. It used to be reliant on water being a big pipe that went from the Darling Barker River up to Broken Hill, and then during the millennial drought, that kind of failed, and so the kids you couldn't wash your kid in the bath because the quality of water coming out of the tap was so poor that everyone was getting like all these skin infections from them. You tend not to bathe so much then because you don't want your child to be harmed, you don't want to be harmed yourself, and so then they had to put another big pipe in up from the Murray, so again putting more pressure on that water system. And yeah, the mental health impacts are profound, and we know that farmers in particular during drought have a lot of mental health concerns. There's higher suicide rates. Maybe another reason to talk about agricultural practices and why we continue to farm water intensive crops on dry continents when they're more prone to water insecurity and therefore more prone to failure. And I'm not an agricultural expert, and I know agricultural experts who would know more about this than me, but talking about, water, crops with low water requirement, like drought resistant crops, and being smart with that. Maybe we shouldn't irrigate rice in Australia. Maybe we shouldn't grow beef.
Well, if there's any issues, then they'll get a bailout too, won't they? So huge inequalities in that respect as well. You've mentioned a little bit, but can we talk a little bit more about it just to really create the awareness, but the inequalities with different communities around, say, Australia and the impacts? Because yes, first world country, wealthy. So in urban areas, there's always a plan, and then we can buy bottled water if we have to. But what about those outlying communities?
Absolutely. And, you think about remote communities in Australia, it's already a massive problem. Certainly, there's parts of South Australia I know that don't have access to clean drinking water and have to get water trucked in. Remote Aboriginal communities are obviously, highly impacted there. And then what that means for their knock-on health. The one other thing we haven't talked about is something like people needing dialysis. So dialysis is a highly water-intensive piece of therapy, because you've got to pump all this water through the person to keep them going because their kidneys are failing. And there's big concerns about how dialysis services are going to be able to be. Are they going to be viable? Are you going to be able to offer them to remote communities when there's water shortage, when there's power problems, and obviously climate change getting hotter as well, and then also increasing the risk of kidney diseases as our planet gets hotter. That's one of the other health impacts of climate change. Then there's the converse. I mean, we're talking about water bankruptcy, mainly about drought, but obviously with floods, there's water bankruptcy as well in some way. Because there might be water everywhere, but not a drop to drink because the water, again, the crops are damaged, the animals drown. Um, and there's bacterial infections. So, you get like globally cholera happens heaps with climate flooding. But, in the Lismore floods, there was outbreaks of Campylobacter and bacterial infections. And so that's still there. And then the other thing is sea level rise associated with glacial melt. And, what's happening in the Torres Strait, what's happening in the Pacific, those lands are drowning under a rising ocean, and that's causing massive problems with. They've got water insecurity because the salt water is coming up and damaging the arable land, and so they're losing fresh water there as well. So it's hard to flesh out causes, isn't it? It's like everything is so interconnected and embroiled with each other, and it's the ultimate in wicked problems is what's happening to the health of our planet. But so much of it comes back to us feeling like we have this infinite planet, these infinite resources that we can just continue to exploit, failing to recognize the limits of the system. And of course, this, our ongoing dependency on fossil fuels, adding heat, causing climate change, being a major source of pollution, land use change, and our agricultural practices. And it's getting harder and harder to ignore. And I think that was the thing that really struck me about this water report, was that if you can ignore this one, you're just happy to live in a box. Like I've been, you two, you're obviously, you're climate aware people. You're both trying really, you're doing what you can. You're making a positive impact on your planet quite deliberately with the work that you do. I try to do that. That's kind of my motivation for the work that I do. But I look around me and I see so many people who aren't doing, even though the need is so, so very great. And, and I understand that denial is attractive because this stuff is so hard and it is so scary, and it's kind of easier to deny and just kind of kick the can down the road or think that's not my problem, that's a problem, or it's a problem for another day. But if there was ever a problem that should motivate people to care, it's running out of water. Like, without water, everything dies. So what do? We just sit back and watch and everything dies? I mean, that's just nuts. But, that's unfortunately, I think that's what seems to happen. I mean, this report came out in January. There was some media about it. It was a UN report. It's a big thing, right? They're doing a podcast. I've done an article. There was something on Channel 9 that, I haven't seen. Where's the response commensurate to the level of threat?
There's another area, just to digress a little bit, but I'll link back in, and we're all guilty of using this, but the increased use of cloud-based services, and we're guilty right now. Our podcast platform uses a cloud-based platform. AI,
yeah.
and the way that's being pushed in across everywhere. We don't need to single out anything. Everywhere it's being pushed. That is hugely energy intensive, hugely water intensive. So, we talk about inequalities, we talk about wealth, we talk about, we think we'll buy ourselves out, we think we'll technologize our way out. And in the famous words of Dr. Mike Joy, we're deluded, if that's what we think our solution is. But there's also another impact. I mean, we talk a lot about health, and this is what we're here to talk about, personal people health, but environmental health as well. The impact on, we talk about a healthy ecosystem is important for healthy people, but our ecosystem itself, not just water to feed our crops, for water to feed our people, our ecosystems that hold the balance, that mitigate climate change. So everything from wetlands to we've talked about your aquifers and your water tables and so on, but there's a severe impact on that as well, which again then impact back on us.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've got, our rivers are in trouble. The Murray River is just been declared critically endangered by our Environment Minister. A lot of that is to do with agricultural practice. A lot of that's to do with climate change. Just had the bloom, or we still got the bloom in South Australia. You think of loss of groundwater. By the way, a lot of that comes back to agriculture and also climate change and our overuse of fertilizers and, deforestation, and meaning, what do? We're deforesting vast amounts of Queensland. so that we can then grow beef cattle. But that means that those ecosystems, that environment is damaged, which means it loses its ability to absorb water. That means when it does flood, all the water just goes, so it doesn't do anything for the environment there. We can't escape that the health of the planet impacts on the health of people, and I suppose sometimes we forget about that. It's like in South Australia, we've got 14 desalination plants now in South Australia, and half of South Adelaide's drinking water comes from a desal plant, which was kind of forward thinking, I think, actually, for the Premier Mike Rann, who made this all happen, because traditionally Adelaide's drinking water came from the Murray, which is now critically endangered, and came from rainfall, which is decreasing because of climate change. So if it wasn't for those desal plants, we'd be in heaps more trouble than we are. But of course, they've got local environmental issues, but they also, as you kind of getting to, Ben, they don't do anything for the natural world. What does it do for the critters that need water to drink? What does it do for the plant life? It's not helping them. It's just making humans are okay. But of course, that doesn't hold true either. If our natural world breaks down, we can't kind of pretend that we're somehow going to escape it. It's going to break us too.
And Kate, I know you've mentioned it, but I just want to circle back to it because it is so important. You're a South Australian local. The algal bloom has been a concern for over a year, and it's kind of left our news now because it's moved a little offshore, but it's not gone, is it?
No.
So,
and millions and millions of sea creatures died, and so much of that, it's sort of a multifactorial thing, the bloom. So fundamentally, we had the big floods that came down from Lismore, and that washed a whole heap of water out into the Murray mouth. But that water was highly nutrient rich because of our over reliance on nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizers. Nitrogen fertilizers being made from gas, again, it keeps coming back to this same sort of thing. And so all that nutrient got washed out into the ocean, sort of upswelled the sediment on the bottom of the ocean, and then there was a marine heat wave. So obviously ocean temperatures are getting hotter and hotter. We had a massive marine heat wave, and that was enough to start the bloom. And now we've got it, and we've still got it. You know what I mean? Like there's sort of attempts at remediation with putting in like air jets up near where we've got those the giant cuttlefish near Wylie. Do you guys know about that? So trying to protect those beautiful giant cuttlefish from the bloom. So there's all these air vents coming up. I don't know heaps about that, but it seems like it's not working so well. Local remediation things, but it's just been a disaster and heartbreaking disaster. Like, you can't go down the beach without seeing it. There's all this foam, and I don't take my dog to the beach anymore because she's just going to eat a dead fish. And I've seen a dead stingray, just big animals, big that you would think were more resilient. And I've spoke to a farmer at a thing down in Middleton about a year ago now, so right at the beginning, and she was saying how they're in drought, so every day as a farmer they're worried about water and worried about the drought. And she said, so I used to go down to the river, down to the beach, because that was my safe place. That was my calm place. I could put the drought behind me. So I could put the drought behind me because the ocean was in front of me, and the ocean was okay. And now it's not. Now there's nowhere for me to go. Everywhere I go, the planet's being harmed. And it really struck with me as a story, and sort of shows that concept of compounding disasters that you read about in all the literature. It says, we've got we talk about the planetary health boundaries, and you go, okay, there's this will happen, this will happen, this will happen, they'll all flow on from each other. And that story just really showed how it's all in there together. And we're the sadness of it, actually, how sad this person was.
And again, the impact on mental well-being.
Yeah. and that you cannot ignore. And then, with the bloom, there's been physical concerns that, like people getting short of breath when they go down the beach, people having skin irritation. You can't eat the sea. The concern about whether or not you can eat the seafood. There's a lot of contention around this. There's a bit of a political hot potato how the bloom was handled in South Australia, by the way. So, I might just let a few things sort of, don't want to go too deeply into it. But, there's so much community concern about it, and this anger about why anger about feeling uninformed, anger about feeling just when you're sad, you react with anger. Some anger directed at the fossil fuel industry because, like when I see, the floods made worse by climate change, the nutrient-rich water due as a, the nitrogen fertilizer as a side product of gas, so again, fossil fuels, climate change, fossil fuels, global heating, temperature rise in the ocean, fossil fuels, all of this coming back to our dependency on these products. And, it's time to move on, time to quit. Let's do something else. Let's change track.
And I suppose it's probably hard to conceive at the moment for Australians because we've had 2 years of a lot of floods, a lot of water. But, swings and roundabouts, it eventually goes back the other way. What are the health impacts from drought conditions? So things like respiratory illness and
Yeah,
food
yeah.
poisoning.
Yeah, well, that's it. The dust basically gets into your lungs. And so if you've got underlying asthma, or you've got underlying COPD or any other, lung condition, cystic fibrosis, you're going to have more trouble. It's the sort of thing that will end up affecting lots of people. You're more likely to have dust storms, and then the dust gets into everything. Then obviously, as we said already, the mental health impacts, and again, impacts on food and water supply, so impacts on food, and then what that means for cost of living. And, obviously we're in a time where cost of living is a big concern. We will get another big drought again. I mean, we remember the millennial drought. We get another one. I mean, there's always Australia, we've always had droughts, we've always had floods. Yes, we have, it's true. But they are certainly getting longer, more severe, more dangerous over time. And really that comes back to climate change. But then when we destroy our biodiversity by not treading lightly, if that's a way of thinking about it, then we lose our resilience as well. And so these things are worse. It's like we were talking before about farming practices and losing groundwater, and therefore the water runs off, and therefore you're not able to, you're more prone to bad bushfires, etc. And that's the other thing we need water for, to put out fires. So I think that's quite important.
Now, talk about food. If you follow lifestyle medicine practices as a GP, what do you advise when trying to treat health ailments? Good food, right? Good nutrition. But part of the issue also with food production is if that goes down or the cost goes up of your fresh produce, you revert more to ultra processed foods because that's cheaper and it's based on crap anyway. So then you also, malnutrition or undernutrition, obesity, diabetes, all from poor diet choice as well. So it's not just food production in essence, also driving people to go and eat the wrong foods as well, because that is what's affordable or that's what's available because that's what's imported.
Yeah, or what's deemed to be affordable too, or what's available. Like there's places where I found this quite an astounding thing. I realised this about 10 years ago when I was working in sort of the northern suburbs in Adelaide, which are the less well-to-do suburbs. Certainly people there are really doing it tougher. And you go to their supermarket and there's hardly any fresh food. Everything's packaged and people don't know how to cook. And, so they're kind of stuck in this cycle. Whereas, like if you go to the market and buy your fruit and veg, it tends to be cheaper. Certainly animal products are more expensive. Processed food is certainly worse for us. And yeah, as you say, like diabetes is, and heart disease, they're really, really common conditions. We're more likely to die of heart disease than anything else. Diabetes is increasing over time, younger and younger people getting it. And yeah, if we had a healthier diet, we'd reduce a lot of that disease burden.
You've been a long time, extraordinarily passionate advocate for planetary health. Why do you believe health practitioners kind of have that responsibility to speak on issues like this?
Well, because it's so foundational, like it's so fundamental. And if you're not talking about this, it's like you're missing the point. You know, we there's I took an oath, right? And I took my oath pretty seriously. And the first line of the oath is, "I consecrate my life to the service of humanity." And if humanity is so embroiled in the health of the planet, then I'm kind of not doing my job, I don't think, if I'm not standing up and doing something about these massive global health problems. As we said, 7 of 9 planetary health boundaries are in the danger zone for, what are they? Land use change, freshwater, saltwater use, biodiversity loss, climate change, air pollution, nitrogen, yeah, plastics. So the novel entities, plastics. Then there's air pollution. Air pollution is a greater risk factor for health than smoking. Like, it would be laughable for me as a doctor to not talk about smoking. Like that's medicine 101. Yep, smoking's bad. Don't smoke. But yet people feel like they can't talk about air pollution from a car exhaust, which is, causing all these health problems, or they don't want to talk about climate change because it's seen as being too political. When it's not political, it's science. It's just been captured by politics. So if I was like, for me, ignoring climate change would be like ignoring chest pain. It's like, here it is, it's been named the greatest public health problem of our century. So the National Health and Climate Strategy, which the government put out in 2023, the first paragraph, greatest public health problem of the 21st century. So how could any health practitioner not treat it, like not be doing something about it? Because it's more important. It's the greatest one. It's like not reading the first chapter of your big textbook and just going into the fine print bits. And I don't know, like I get frustrated, actually, I must admit, with people who sort of dismiss these planetary health problems and think that they don't matter to them. Maybe it's about scope, maybe it's about awareness, maybe it's just I'm too busy doing, this thing, getting and spending and, paying my mortgage and all of that sort of stuff to bother thinking about it. But, it's increasingly part of our medical life. Like in South Australia, I think it was the 26th of January, might have been the 27th, we had our hottest ever night. And the nighttime minimum was 34 degrees. Geez, it was hot. And the next morning, I tried to take my dog for a walk. It was 38 degrees at 7 o'clock in the morning. That is like, that's not business as usual. That's not just, oh, it's a bit of an outlier. That is weird. And so and then, my next shift in general practice, pretty much everybody I saw was heat affected. Of course they were. Like everybody was. And so it's right in front of me. I'm treating it. This is me as a doctor doing my job. I can't ignore the funny turn the person's having because they've been overwhelmed by heat. I do think there are, and I don't want to be awful either. I don't want to bag people because I do think there's less education. There's more education now, but there certainly was none when I went through med school. Primary healthcare or public health medicine is like its own speciality, and a lot of doctors don't really think about it because they're, gastroenterologists or they're cardiologists or whatever. But these things very much are impacting on all the specialities. I think we're kind of complacent. We've forgotten how lucky we are to have primary health care.
Is it complacency? We've for years have also spoken a lot about nutrition, and nutrition in medicine, it's well noted, it's hardly covered, right?
Yeah.
When the research shows that nutrition plays a big component in that. Do you think it's the same then with climate change, environmental, and so on, that it's just not taught? Do you think rather than complacency, it's just lack of ability to join those dots?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an element of that, Ben. And obviously, it's a tricky thing, and and also don't want to. I don't want any health practitioners listening to me to think I'm.
Let's not forget, GPs used to prescribe smoking, and they used to prescribe Coca-Cola, or it's
but that's not, I mean, they have 10 minutes sometimes to see someone. Like, the load is immense. Like,
I think it's a lot of it is how to talk about it, and incorporating it. So one of the things that DEA has done actually is produced this thing called an organ system mapping project for climate change. And what we did was, rather than climate change having to be taught on the side, which means, it's hard for the educators to find time in their curriculum, because there is a lot of stuff you need to know. You need to know how to save lives. You need to know how to do stuff. It's incorporating climate and air pollution, etc., into the curriculum, so that when you learn about cardiovascular disease, you learn about how climate change and the effect of heat is going to impact the cardiovascular system. When you learn about respiratory, it's the same thing, so that it makes it easier to incorporate it into a normal consultation. I mean, I think the easiest way to incorporate it is to recognise it as a risk factor. So, I think asthma is a great example for that. So, it's really normal that if, as a doctor, I'm talking to someone about asthma, I tell them not to smoke, and, if, avoid secondary smoke, or if it's a child, don't smoke around your kids, it's still, and that would be considered absolutely normal for me to talk about that. With planetary health, I can say things like, if you have gas in your home, that's going to aggravate the asthma. So this is a good reason to get gas out of your home. Climate change is making asthma worse because of its changing in ragweed and other sort of pollen species, and that's increasing asthma risk. Thunderstorm asthma, increasing asthma risk. Transport-related air pollution, getting lungs full of muck out of car exhausts. And so you can incorporate it into the conversation, rather than having a normal conversation, then having to say to the patient, oh, by the way, the planet's health's in big trouble. You should do X, we should do X, Y, and Z. So, yeah, I think maybe it's people not recognising it as in their scope, and so they just don't bring it up.
To our listeners, all this stuff, we actually have a whole episode with Kate, our last episode titled Health Hazards of Climate Change. So we do deep dive into this particular topic, and gas, for instance, you mentioned is very much was a big part of that conversation, which is kind of ironic, because now in an age where power cuts and all that, gas is seen as well, at least I can have a hot shower and cook my food when there's a power cut. So that's the part of the conversation. The reality with climate change is that gas is actually seen as a stable source of providing basic necessities in the home. Anyway, we're not going to deep dive into that and derail this conversation.
We're not doing a big greenwashing segue now.
No,
I'm
saying it's seen as. It's seen as.
Thank you, Ben.
Look, it's but you mentioned about some of the work that needs to be done or is being done. So tell us a little bit about what the current focus is for Doctors of Environment, the current work, current campaigns, what your focus is right now.
Yeah, sure. Well, I suppose, just back on the water, we're just writing submissions to the Murray-Darling Basin Plan and trying to do some advocacy about the importance of looking after water. And if any listener wants to write a submission, they're due on May the 1st. So I don't know if that's going to go with the timing of having this published. But, certainly it's something where, considering how important this is, anybody is able to ring up their MP and say, hey, water, serious problem, what are you going to do about it? The biggest thing we've done lately is a open letter about quitting our oil dependence. So, the crisis in the Middle East is very, very awful, and it's a health and human rights disaster. It's certainly shown how dependent Australia is on global oil markets, and then that has health impacts because, cost of living means, lack of, we were sort of touching on all of that before, what it means when people can't afford to have fresh food, people can't afford to go to the doctor, people can't afford to get to work. So therefore, there's lots of mental health knock-on effects of that. So we've had an open letter, which we've just had published in the Canberra Times a week or so ago, did it during a sitting week so that hopefully, the politicians might get to see it. So that's been quite fun. We've got another campaign called Idle Off, which is about transport-related air pollution, which we're doing in conjunction with Parents for Climate. And that's about getting people to turn their cars off when they drop their kids off at school, because it's schools are a exposure hotspot for transport-related air pollution. And, that's a significant health problem. It impacts on children, particularly because they're little and they're sort of exhaust height, increasing their risk of heart and lung learning issues. So that's a big thing. We did have a big court case last year where we took NOPSEMA and Woodside to court about the Scarborough offshore gas project, and that was a significant thing for us to do, especially because DEA, we are a small org. We've got tight margins. We don't accept any money from the government, but we felt that the environmental plan for the Scarborough offshore gas project did not protect the environment. And so we undertook a judicial review of NOPSEMA, who's the government regulator's approval of Woodside's plan for Scarborough. Unfortunately, we didn't win, but we did at least have our day in court. And, we're proud that we did that. The most interesting thing that came out of that was the adjudication, which said that it is not for the court to adjudicate on anthropogenic global warming caused by greenhouse gas emissions. Basically found that NOPSEMA, the government regulated, was within their rights to do it. But that the court was basically saying our hands are tied, we can't really do anything. And, the thing that came to me from that was, well, if the court can't do anything, then who can? And that sends us back to Canberra, because the people who can are our governments that make these regulations. And so I think that's the thing that all of us can do, is be politically active. And, elected representatives are elected to represent us. We're allowed to tell them what we think. And, we're allowed to, ring them up, go and visit them, whatever, and say, you need to take water bankruptcy seriously. You need to take our oil dependency seriously. You need to take our planet's health seriously, because the way you're acting, you're spending our planet like it's just going to last forever. And there's so much literature now. There's so many reports. There's so much evidence. You're not doing your job properly. Let's do that.
Dr. Kate Wylie, it's always a pleasure having you on the show. With you, we get honesty, we get heartfelt, but we also get true inspiration as well with your true words of wisdom. So thank you always for making time for us to come onto the show. You are a fan favorite for sure. A lot of our listeners appreciate your dialogue on here. So thank you so much for giving us a very vital and timely update on what's critical for both planet and personal health, and obviously a little bit of direction of where we should be focusing our attention and our energy and to trying to make a difference. So thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome, Ben and Emma. Thank you both so much. It's lovely to come back and talk with you guys again. Thank you so much.